Business Book Summaries. Today, let's discuss a book called Make It Stick, which is all about effective ways to remember things. The subtitle, The Science of Successful Learning, delves into the scientific principles of effective learning. After reading this book, I had some eye-opening realizations. For instance, back in high school, many of my female classmates used to carefully highlight and write notes in their textbooks, making them look well-studied and vibrant. On the other hand, I never wrote or highlighted anything in my books, and they looked almost brand new. But when it came to test time, I consistently outperformed them. They would often attribute my higher scores to natural intelligence, but it's not that I'm naturally smarter. It's that my approach to learning is more effective. The book's research suggests that excessive note-taking and highlighting can actually hinder memory retention.
Before we delve further, remember that we regularly share new content. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel Business Book Summaries and hit the notification bell for the latest updates.
We often think that taking lots of notes and repeating information will help us remember, but that's not necessarily the case. That's why I believe this book is a must-read. It addresses the challenges students face in learning and offers methods to make the learning process more efficient and grounded in science. It helps students quickly grasp the connections between different concepts, leading to significant improvements in academic performance. This is important for everyone, not just students. I consider this book to be an advanced version of PEAK, Secrets from the New Science of Expertise. It suggests that with around 10,000 hours of focused practice, guided by the 3F principle, anyone can become highly skilled in any area. The book goes into more detail about the concept of deliberate practice, challenging yourself, and expanding your skills. This makes it a valuable resource for anyone looking to improve their learning techniques. The book starts with a thrilling story about a pilot named Matt Bruin. During a flight, he suddenly faces an engine failure, causing the plane to tilt due to the power imbalance. In that critical moment, he had to use his stored knowledge to make life or death decisions. He quickly assessed the cargo's weight on board and determined whether a single engine could handle it. He had to decide whether to try restarting the failed engine and what the risks were. He also had to calculate the optimal angle for a successful restart and consider the complications that could arise if it failed. Through a series of quick, complex maneuvers, he managed to safely land the plane. The takeaway here is that in real-life situations, like piloting a plane, you don't have the luxury of time to search for solutions online or consult a manual. You have to rely on your internal reservoir of knowledge for immediate problem solving. Simply storing information in your brain isn't enough. You need to develop it into an actionable mental framework that you can automatically access and apply. Only then can you say you've truly mastered a subject. The journey to forming a mental model is essentially the process we all go through when learning a new skill. One of the most surprising findings, supported by extensive psychological research, is that repetitive reading is not very effective for learning. Continuous reading can create a false sense of mastery, making us think we've retained the information. This illusion is especially strong when you annotate your notes with colorful highlights. It's similar to the Google effect, where the ease of finding information online makes us less likely to remember it. This false sense of understanding is evident in what's known as the repeated reading test. Educators and psychologists conducted various tests comparing two groups of learners. The first group continuously read the material, while the second group read it once and revisited it a week later. The results showed that the latter group had significantly better memory retention and higher test scores. What's even more effective than revisiting the material after 2 weeks? Taking a quiz on it. Providing a retrieval opportunity, such as a brief quiz, can dramatically boost memory retention. Why does this work? It's because of a cognitive function called metacognition, which is our ability to assess our own understanding. Metacognition can be skewed, leading even the most diligent students into two common traps. First, they may not recognize their learning gaps and be unsure where to focus their efforts for improvement. Second, They often rely on ineffective study techniques that give them a false sense of mastery, like excessive note-taking, underlining, highlighting, and repetitive reading. Psychologists point out that many students prefer repetitive learning methods because they are less challenging. What's challenging is when your brain has to struggle to recall information, which can be uncomfortable. Whether or not you manage to recall it, the effort itself aids in deeper understanding. This concept is called retrieval. The reason both teachers and students often resist retrieval-based learning is that it can be uncomfortable. While exams are generally disliked due to the stress and pressure they bring, they are actually highly beneficial for memory retention. Introducing even a small element of cognitive challenge and active retrieval can significantly enhance learning outcomes. Let's talk about a middle school experiment in Columbia City, Illinois, as an example. In this experiment, 8th graders took low-stress quizzes on science topics, and they got instant feedback on how they did. These quizzes covered minor topics and were worth 3 credits. Another set of topics, not covered in the quizzes, was reviewed 3 times by the students, and this served as the control group. A month later, during a major exam, it was observed which set of topics the students remembered better. The students who had taken quizzes on certain topics scored an average grade of AU, while those who had only reviewed the material without quizzes scored a C+. This big difference shows that using retrieval-based learning methods, like taking quizzes, can reduce the biases in our thinking about our own learning. The conclusion here is clear. The easier the learning process, the less effective it is. People who seem diligent by constantly reading and taking notes may look hardworking, but they are actually using less effective learning methods. They spend a lot of time on tasks that don't challenge their thinking. Think of it like this. Continuous reading and note-taking without testing is like smoothing out a chain without tying any knots. It's the act of taking tests that ties these knots and solidifies the information in your memory. This key insight from the book highlights the importance of challenging ourselves during the learning process. Now, let's talk about what's called post-peak, which shows how this book builds on the ideas presented in the book peak. One study involved 2 groups practicing throwing beanbags into a basket 3 feet away. One group only practiced from the 3-foot distance because that's the distance they would be tested at later. The other group was never allowed to practice from 3 feet and alternated between 2 and 4 feet. After a rigorous 12-week practice period, both groups were tested on their 3-foot throws. Surprisingly, the group that practiced at varying distances performed better than the group that only practiced at 3 feet. You might wonder why this is the case. According to the principles of focus, feedback, and fixing advocated in peak, you'd think that continuous specialized practice would lead to the best results. However, the research found that practicing at varying distances actually improved performance when tested at the 3-foot mark. Why does this happen? Well, when you practice something to the point where it feels automatic, you're not really engaging your brain in a meaningful way. To enhance learning and memory retention, it's crucial to introduce time gaps and vary the activities during your practice sessions. For example, in medical training, doctors learn intricate skills like suturing. In one study, half of the doctors completed all 4 training sessions in a single day, which is the standard approach. The other half completed the same 4 sessions, but with a week's gap between each. A month after the training, the doctors were tested on various metrics. Those who had spaced out training sessions significantly outperformed their peers who had crammed all the sessions into one day. This is because the brain needs time to consolidate new information into long-term memory. Incorporating time gaps or varying training activities can significantly improve learning outcomes. This idea is one of the reasons this book is seen as an extension of the principles of deliberate practice. Now, let's look at how you learn something that's high stakes, where making mistakes isn't an option because it could be life-threatening. The book uses skydiving as an example to explain this. In skydiving training, taking notes is not allowed. Instead, the focus is on listening, observing, mentally practicing, and then executing the moves. Skydiving schools use ongoing quizzes as a teaching method. If you can't pass the quiz, you're out. In skydiving, the first rule is that note-taking is off limits. The focus is on listening, observing, mentally practicing, and then executing the moves. Skydiving schools use ongoing quizzes as a teaching method. If you can't pass the quiz, you're out. The skydiving training process involves gradually increasing the difficulty. It starts with practicing in a sandpit and progresses to practicing from a 12-foot platform. The idea is to build a strong mental model of the skill, which is essential for high-stakes situations. Breaking down the skydiving training process helps us understand that learning anything, even something as risky and complex as skydiving, can be divided into 3 phases. The first phase is encoding, where you mentally categorize what you're seeing and learning. Let's break down the process of learning complex skills into 3 main phases. First, there's the encoding phase. This is when you need to mentally tag and understand actions or information. Imagine watching people practice parachute landing rolls. You need to create mental labels for these actions to know what they mean. This phase is all about encoding the new knowledge in your mind. The next phase is consolidation. This is where you reinforce those mental labels by going through a cycle of forgetting, testing, and repeated practice. This repetition helps you solidify those mental representations. The goal is to get to a point where you can perform these actions almost automatically without consciously thinking about them. This is the consolidation phase. The final phase is retrieval. It's about the ability to recall and apply what you've learned. These 3 phases, encoding, consolidation, and retrieval, are crucial for mastering any complex skill. When you're learning new skills, you might have to unlearn old habits. For instance, if you're used to driving a tractor, adapting to driving a car can be challenging because you've built up habits. Forgetting old knowledge is essential to make room for new knowledge. Forgetting doesn't mean erasing the old information completely. It's often just putting it in your subconscious temporarily. This process of setting aside old knowledge in your subconscious to make space for the new stuff is vital in the learning process. Interestingly, the easier something is to recall, the less likely we are to remember it in the long run. That's why the learning process requires effort, especially in the initial stages of memory consolidation. This effort comes through retrieval exercises, testing, and ongoing challenges. The next step in the learning process is creating mental models. This means taking the memories you've solidified and being able to act on them instinctively, much like how a trained skydiver knows what to do when jumping from a plane. Then there's the skill of generalization. This is the ability to draw connections and make broader observations based on a single instance. Leonardo da Vinci, for example, saw birds soaring and fish swimming and contemplated the similarities between avian flight and fish movement. This skill allowed him to make groundbreaking contributions to fluid dynamics. Conceptualization is another aspect. It involves deeply understanding what something is called and why it has that particular name. You also consider the relationships between different elements. Lastly, there's learning transfer. This means taking what you've learned from your studies and applying it to your everyday life, making it a part of your daily existence. I'm a big fan of this book because it provides answers to questions my friends often ask about effective learning methods. The book is full of insights on this topic. One intriguing point it covers is the concept of benign interference, which seems to enhance learning outcomes. Benign interference means that introducing some challenges or difficulties in the learning process can actually help with memory retention. For example, when students use textbooks with fuzzy text or typos, they tend to remember the content better. It's like when the course material doesn't align perfectly with the textbook, students are forced to work harder to understand it, which actually helps them retain the information. Similarly, when words are missing letters, requiring the reader to fill them in, it might slow down reading speed, but it strengthens memory retention. These challenges disrupt the learning flow, but they also push learners to work harder to make sense of the material. This is called benign interference. However, It's important to note that if the difficulty level becomes too extreme, making the content incomprehensible or the challenges insurmountable, it won't aid learning. For instance, trying to learn Latin from scratch might be too big of a hurdle. Starting with small daily Latin phrases is a more manageable approach, and while allowing children to have some control over their learning pace is a growing educational trend, it also comes with some cautions and considerations. The idea that kids naturally know how to learn and will find their own way might seem appealing, but it's risky. It doesn't take into account the conflict between what Daniel Kahneman calls System 1 and System 2 in the learning process. System 1 is our intuitive, emotional side, while System 2 is our rational, analytical side that uses tools for research and calculation. This book has discussed this topic extensively. Let's understand the role of System 1 in influencing our learning with an example. In 1985, a flight from Taipei to Los Angeles faced engine failure. The crew tried to restart the engine, believing the plane was flying level. However, the plane was actually in a nosedive, a dangerous situation called spatial disorientation. They trusted their gut feeling or System 1, thinking the altimeter was faulty. It was only when they saw the ground that they realized their mistake and managed to pull the plane back up just in time. This incident serves as a cautionary tale about relying solely on intuition. Even highly trained professionals like pilots can sometimes make mistakes when their intuitive thinking doesn't align with reality. The book also discusses memory distortion and its implications for learning. For instance, a woman provided a description that led to the arrest of a man named Thompson, who had an alibi. It turned out that she had watched Thompson's live TV broadcast before the attack, and her mind mistakenly associated him with her attacker. This illustrates how memory distortion can affect our ability to learn accurately. If we let kids have full control over their learning, they might fall into cognitive traps, misjudging time, or having an inflated sense of their own abilities. To gauge your learning progress, it's essential to engage in hands-on practice and regular testing. When you test yourself against experts, it provides a reality check that can help minimize errors caused by intuitive thinking. Realistic training scenarios are also crucial. For example, in police training for disarming assailants, officers usually practice with a partner. But sometimes, the training doesn't fully replicate real-world conditions. In a real confrontation, you'd never hand a gun back to an assailant. But because the training was so automatic, an officer did exactly that. This highlights how intuitive thinking, or System 1, can sometimes lead us astray. The book also debunks the myth that a low IQ hampers learning. IQ isn't fixed. It's relative and can change over time. Modern understanding of intelligence recognizes different facets like analytical, creative, and practical intelligence. Measuring these facets is best done through dynamic testing, which guides you on how to improve over time. The importance of having a well-structured knowledge base cannot be overstated. Many people read books, but struggle to integrate them into their lives because they lack a cohesive framework for their knowledge. Lastly, the book advocates for lifelong learning. The human brain is incredible. We're born with around 100 billion neurons, which are like the building blocks of our thinking abilities. These neurons form connections called synapses, and this process peaks at around ages 1 to 2, with about 50% more synapses than in adulthood. As we age, some synapses are pruned away, resulting in a more organized and rational mind. Our cognitive abilities are influenced by a mix of genetic and environmental factors, including personality traits and curiosity. It's important to note that while genetics may make a child a bit more naturally curious than others, nurturing that curiosity in their environment can significantly boost their intelligence. So, if you're looking for quick ways to increase IQ, you might be out of luck. However, there are strategies that can act as intelligence boosters. Embracing a growth mindset, practicing like experts, and using memory cues can all enhance our cognitive abilities. In simple terms, genetics play a minor role in determining our intelligence unless there's a medical condition affecting the brain. It's the environment, as shown by studies on identical twins raised in different settings, that has a major impact on intelligence, personality, and learning capabilities. So, instead of blaming genetics or environment, we can control our mindset. Having an expert like mindset means seeing greatness not as something magically gifted, but as the result of hard work and focused practice. Even renowned artists like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci achieved their brilliance through continuous effort and a belief in growth. This book, along with Peak and Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, is a must-read for students and educators. They teach us that effective learning comes from having a growth mindset, resilience in the face of failure, embracing challenges, and consistent, deliberate practice. In summary, the book offers two key takeaways. First, it provides learning strategies for anyone who wants to learn, whether it's you or your kids. Focus on recalling information from memory instead of just rereading it. Challenge yourself to remember what you've learned. Second, space out your practice sessions and mix in different subjects to test yourself effectively. For educators, the book suggests explaining the mechanics of learning, teaching students the methods of effective learning, and creating desirable difficulties by introducing challenges that are appropriately challenging. Lastly, it emphasizes transparency after assessments, offering feedback and clarifying objectives, which builds respect and trust in the classroom. In essence, this book aims to inspire a more proactive and ambitious learning environment, ensuring that kids are engaged and not scared of challenges. It provides effective learning strategies for children to explore the unknown with enthusiasm.
We're keen to hear your thoughts on our content. Feel free to share your opinions or recommend books in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel Business Book Summaries and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest summaries. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.